Poilievre always talks about calling a carbon tax election. It's clear he wants to make affordability a centerpiece of his campaign. And it's done quite well for him over the past year. Almost every single poll has shown him with about a 20% lead. And when you ask Canadians what they care about, affordability is a big one. Luxury concerns that people can afford when their bank accounts are full, like global warming issues, those have fallen by the wayside as housing and groceries take the lead. So it's not that surprising that as Justin Trudeau looks at a very likely 2025 election, he's seeking to win back some of that ground. And indeed, he has announced, and Chrystia Freeland has announced, a GST holiday around the Christmas season. And when Pierre Poilievre said that that was not something he would support, the Trudeau Liberals pivoted, saying, he's not really in favor of tax cuts now, is he? So far, that messaging has not connected with Canadian voters. But put that aside, is it good policy? Joining us now to talk about tax cuts in general and the government's fiscal policy is Dan Kelly, who's the president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. You can follow him at cfib.ca or on Twitter. Dan, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good to be with you, Ezra.
Well, it's our pleasure. You bring a lot of expertise with you. And of course, you're in touch with independent business, which typically means small and medium-sized business. And one of the things I've heard is that just handling these GST, HST changes is going to be a real paperwork burden for small businesses. Is that the case? What are your members telling you? First of all, before you answer that, can you sum up the changes that Trudeau has brought in and then tell us how business is reacting to it?
Yeah, look, this is a 2-month holiday from December 14th to February 15th. It removes the GST, zero rates it effectively. And in HST provinces, where the combined federal provincial tax is 13 to 15%, it gets rid of the whole thing for a 2-month period. It's only on a few goods, so it is on restaurant meals and some of the grocery products that still carry GST, packaged goods and snack foods, drinks, for example, beer, wine, and some coolers, children's books, children's toys, even the Christmas tree. That's it. And so for that, small and medium-sized businesses are now scrambling with 2 weeks' notice to try to temporarily remove the GST from those items and only those items in order to keep compliant with CRA rules. And that's where the rub comes in. Small business owners don't mind tax reductions, but I find myself in the unusual position of lobbying against an actual reduction in tax. That's not our issue with it. The administrative issue for this temporary tax reduction is the major problem. So just as a couple of examples, if you go and you want to buy Lego, certain Lego sets are GST exempt, other ones not.
What would be the difference? Why would it apply to some and not others?
Apparently it is if the Lego set is oriented at children, it is going to be GST exempt. So that we're apparently to go with what's on the manufacturer's suggested age group for the particular toy. Model planes that are oriented at kids are GST exempt, at adults are not. We have all sorts of administrative questions pouring into our offices across the country. A gift basket that includes some food, but say a coffee mug in it, what's that? How is that going to be taxed? These are judgment calls that business owners are having to make. A hobby store in Calgary said that they have 3,500 items, and they have to go through every single one and make judgment calls as to whether it remains taxable or is not taxable during this period of time. And if they make a mistake, Ezra, they're going to have an audit from the Canada Revenue Agency in March or April demanding back taxes, penalties, and interest. This is nuts.
Gosh. You know, I understand the point because, of course, everyone wants lower taxes. But if it's just for a 2-month, I'm going to call that a gimmick. Because if it was real, it would be permanent. I'm sure a lot of companies had paperwork issues when Harper took the GST down from 7% to 5%. But they knew it was a one-time thing. It was fairly straightforward. And I think they liked the fact it was a tax cut. This is a 2-month blip. And, I go to a dollar store in my neighborhood occasionally, and I can just imagine the hundreds and hundreds, and by the time you do it, And it's starting in less than 2 weeks. And by the time you do it, it's almost time to undo it. That is no gift to anyone.
No, and look, for these retailers, they've also announced this just a couple of days ago. The legislation, for goodness sakes, isn't even passed. I was at the Senate committee last night reviewing the legislation, for goodness sakes. And here we are in the busiest possible season for small business owners, where it's make it or break it. If they don't do well during the Christmas and holiday season, many of them are just done. And so they are now having to put in place this complicated system. In fact, it even gets worse than that. They have to continue to charge the tax until December 13th when the store closes. So your dollar store has to do that, say, till 9 p.m. on December 13th, Friday night. Saturday morning, they have to have in place the proper system to make sure that they're not charging GST or HST at that moment. And as a result, they have to that evening do the computer programming to make that happen. But they can't do it beforehand. Otherwise, they will have not charged the tax when they are supposed to. These are judgment calls. The CRA is not even in a position to give guidance on most issues. We've got a litany of examples of complex situations. As you said, when the GST was first introduced, that's how we ended up with the 6 donut rule, where you pay GST if you buy 5, but you don't pay GST if you pay 6. Well, at least you only had to do that one time. You didn't have to switch it on, switch it off on a dime here, as we are right now.
You know, I mean, when I go into shops these days, I have a different mindset. I feel very sympathetic with the entrepreneurs, and I feel sympathetic for typically the young cashiers because all I can think of is, how do you live in these expensive housing markets if you're making, like, I look at a business, I look at a restaurant different than I probably did 10 years ago. Maybe it's just my own experience. And my point for mentioning that, Dan, is, was there anyone at the cabinet table who has done the hard work? Like, just think of a corner store, think of a convenience store, think of a gas station attendant. You're on your feet all day. You're making 30 cents here, $1 here. You know, a long time ago, I got to know the Ontario Korean Businessmen's Association. I actually worked for them briefly, I should disclose. They work their tushes off 364 days a year. Maybe they close on Christmas. And they're making a buck here, a few pennies there. And I wonder if there is anyone from that world, Dan, who was around the decision-making table, because it sounds like it was a bunch of people whose only life experience is online or working for an NGO or a government agency. No one has had a job where they're on their feet 12, 14 hours a day, making money 30 cents at a time, which is what it's like in the convenience store business. And I'm just thinking of dollar store, convenience store, and restaurants. And I don't know, Dan, is there anyone within Trudeau's advisors or his cabinet who has ever lived the life of a small business person?
It is hard to find. I can tell you that this was designed with political calculations in mind and not much else. This was designed to curry the support of the NDP because the NDP had put forward a list of items to permanently exempt GST, HST from, and that was the main impetus behind this particular decision. Look, again, small businesses don't mind trying to help their customers save some money.
Right.
But all of the administrative costs to put this in place are going to exceed, for many, the value of any additional dollars their customers may be able to spend in these businesses. I've talked to restaurant owners that were almost in tears. One guy was going through every bottle of beer because the way he read the bulletin said that it was beer, wine, and mixed drinks that contained less than 7% alcohol. So he was trying to figure out how to, for each beer, determine what button to press to exempt the GST if it had under 7, or what button to press if it had over, only for then me to clarify, just because I've been dealing with this for a couple of days now, to say, no, it's all beer, all wine, and it's only spirit coolers under 7%. But it kind of illustrated the point that for business owners that are trying to do what they can, they want to stay in compliance with government. They don't mind trying to help their customers save a buck or two. But this is not the way. It is a hot mess. And there are 1,000 better ways to reduce the burden on Canadians than a temporary 2-month holiday. For one thing, get rid of the carbon tax that is going up by 19% 6 weeks after this holiday ends. Like, we're lowering prices for 2 months and then permanently raising taxes 6 weeks after the holiday ends. Like that, for retailers, for businesses in general, this is a mess.